morning. I'm running a bit short on time today. I have a medical appointment that I need to get to. So I thought I would quickly film a little bit in the car. I don't know how this is going to work. I suppose we'll see how much I can hear when I get home and decide whether or not it's salvageable, usable, or any good. So I wanted to talk a little bit about my reading plans for February. So recently in one of my wrap-up videos I talked about reading Stuart McConey's book with a little help from my friends, which is about the Beatles, and I had a great time with that. It was really good, but while I was reading it I sort of became aware, I guess, of how many Beatles books I have on my TBR that I haven't got to, that I've sort of accumulated over time and just not got around to. So I thought what I would do is spend February kind of maybe having a little concentrated hit and see if I could clear the TBR of Beatles books. So I'm calling it Fab Four Feb, because who doesn't like alliteration? And yeah, the aim is going to be to read Beatles books. Anybody who wants to join in, you're more than welcome. If perhaps you have a Beatles book on your shelf that you haven't got to yet, then by all means. Although please promise me that you'll put it in the comments, because it might be one I don't have. Yeah, so I'm not going to talk today about what I'm planning to read. I'll do that in a different video. But what I thought I would do is, if anybody was interested in reading Beatles books but didn't really know where to start, I thought I'd give a couple of recommendations on some of my favourites. So depending on whether or not you've read Beatles books before, whether or not you know anything about the Beatles, will kind of dictate where you want to start, because there's no point deep diving into something really detailed and niche if you have no idea which one Ringo is. So what I would suggest is, if you are a total beginner, that you pick up Hunter Davies' authorised biography. So Hunter Davies spent a couple of years with the Beatles during the 60s, and he stayed friends with the band after they split. So he was able to stay up to date with what was happening with them and kind of do updates on subsequent editions. It just makes it a really nicely rounded, comprehensive read, and actually it's a really good place to start because it covers everything that you need. Another one that I would recommend as a good starting point is the Beatles anthology. This is a coffee table style book that was put out in conjunction with the anthology project, so the TV series and the albums were all released as kind of a retrospective collected works, and the book goes along with that. And the book was put together with George, Paul and Ringo all being involved. Yoko was also involved in the anthology project, so it's a fairly even account, and it's kind of another officially approved account that sort of covers everything and gives you a good idea of when, where, how and who. It also, because of the size of it, has some gorgeous photos in it, really nice. For anyone looking to get into the minutiae, I would recommend Mark Lewison's Complete Recording Sessions. This is kind of laid out like a diary, and it includes entries for every occasion when the Beatles recorded at Abbey Road, and gives you details of what they're recording, what they're working on. It's quite techy. I find it's one of those ones that's quite useful to have on hand while I'm reading other books, so that I can refer back to it and kind of put the sessions in context to kind of objectively break it down and point at the bits that don't work out as well. We'll give an honourable mention to Mark Lewison's All These Years, Volume 1, Tune In. The reason it gets an honourable mention rather than a recommendation is because it's a beast of a book. This thing is a behemoth. It's like, about 1,000 pages long. It's big and it's really detailed, and Mark Lewison's obviously put a huge amount of time and effort and love into researching and writing it. But it's volume 1, supposedly volume 1 of 3. I read this, I want to say it was about a decade, don't park there, about a decade, maybe 10 years ago, and there's still no sign of volume 2 or volume 3, certainly not volume 3. So it depends how you go into this at the start. If you go in treating it almost like Love Me Do, that it's a very detailed insight into a specific period of time, then I think it's amazing. It's a really, really comprehensive resource. But if you go in, as I did, thinking that this was the start of an epic retelling of the Beatles' history, it's quite unsatisfying because you put a lot of time into it. This is not a short read, and when you get to the end, that was all she wrote, and you're kind of going, that's great, but and then so yeah, I kind of caveated that if you take it as it is, awesome. If you take it as part 1, it's a bit frustrating as a read. So next up, one of the main books I always recommend to people who ask me about Beatles books is You Never Give Me Your Money by Peter Doggett. This is one of my favourites. It deals with the Alan Klein era and the business side of the Beatles, which I know sounds really dry, but it's not. By this point in their career, by the time Alan Klein comes on the scene, the Beatles are a business, and they are businessmen, albeit unqualified and unskilled. And there's a huge amount of money floating around and some weird choices being made. So the way that that all unfolds and the impact that Alan Klein, Linda's family, and other influences that were around them at the time have on how they interact with each other on a personal level, then goes on to completely impact how they proceed as a band, and in all honesty, the fact that they don't proceed for much longer as a band. So that one's really, I think it's really fascinating. I'd also recommend The Love You Make by, say, Peter Brown and Stephen Gaines. If I'm wrong, I'll put their names on the screen. This one is, there's no nice way to describe this. This is trashy. This is a trashy read. This is like music biographies done by a gossip magazine. There's no other way to describe that. It deals with the personal. It deals with the stuff that I imagine the Beatles didn't really want anybody writing books about particularly. I imagine by this point they didn't care, but I imagine there are some of these things that they would have preferred were private. But if you want to know who was doing what to who and when, this is kind of it. Peter Brown was one of the Beatles business managers for a time. I think he was Brian Epstein's assistant. And then he remained close to some of the band, and I think he was best man at John's wedding, I want to say. To Yoko, the second wedding, not Cynthia. So he's got some pretty unique insights. This is not written as a discrete memoir. This is a tell-all. But it's good fun, and actually the trashiness kind of works. So yeah, I'd recommend that one too. Just give a quick mention to Love Me Do, The Beatles' Progress. It's by Michael Braun. This one's interesting. It focuses in on one specific tour and follows the Beatles as they play various dates on that tour. It's an interesting behind-the-scenes insight and probably a good lesson in don't meet your heroes, because at this point in their career, they are successful, and going through something that I don't think anybody else had been through. So there's no real guide for them on how they're supposed to respond and how they're supposed to adjust, I guess. And I think holding celebrities up to unrealistic standards usually sets you up to be disappointed. But what you're dealing with, by this point in their career, what you're dealing with is 4 very arrogant and fairly entitled young men who are not necessarily making brilliant choices with how they deal with that success and arrogance. None of them come off fantastically in this, but it's a really interesting thing to read because so many of the Beatles, what you'll find with so many Beatles books is a really healthy dose, or an unhealthy dose, depending on how you look at it, of hero worship. Most Beatles books are written by people who love the Beatles, which is great because you need to have a passion about a subject that you're going to write about in detail, but I think sometimes it stops you being objective. And one thing I can't accuse this book of is failing to be objective about who these young men are at the time, and that's quite a refreshing change from a lot of the Beatles books that you read. So yeah, I'd recommend that one. Anyway, I'm where I'm supposed to be. As you can probably hear, it's raining a lot and I don't really want to get out of the car, but I'm gonna. So I'm gonna leave you here. I hope you join in. I hope anyone who has the slightest inclination to read a Beatles book will take this as their opportunity to give it a go. Yeah, if you're a Beatles fan, Fab Four February, it's going to be fun. If you're not a Beatles fan, please forgive me. There will be non-Beatles content as well. Oh, it's raining so much. And normal service will resume in March. It's a short month. It's going to be fine. It's not that bad. But yeah. Anyway, I hope everybody's all right. And I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.